And again, today will be the last lesson for this class. So if you have like any questions, not just about the final project, but about like Java in general, feel free to just ask me during this time. The lesson itself will also be pretty short. We'll just be going over what ideas for the final project, and then just some tips and tricks for when you're coding. So after like I go over the PowerPoint today, I'll be just hanging around answering your guys' questions. Otherwise, like if you're comfortable with doing the project yourself and you don't want to like hang out after class, feel free to drop off. Otherwise, like if you have any other questions or you want to just hang around just in case like you want to like just in case you want some help debugging or like working with your code, feel free to just hang around. I'll be here until 6 p.m. EST or 3 p.m. PST. So yeah, I'll be available to help out. All right. Yeah, so again for this lesson, we'll basically be just going over like the final project. Technically, the final project is you're creating your own Java program yourself using what we've learned in the past lessons. But today I'll just be going over just some ideas of like what are some good ideas for beginner Java programs, and what are some tips that might help you out when you're working with code on your own. So basically, during this course, we went over 4 major things. So the first one is basic variables and operations. So these are just like the basic building blocks of code. So the different data types are available in Java and what you can do to manipulate those data types. The second one is the if statements and loops. So if else statements can do multiple cases. And this is just like different ways you can iterate over code, or even like, or do like branching code. So using if statements and like for or while loops. The third thing we went over is objects and classes. So objects are sort of a special kind of data type, and classes are used to create objects. So this is just a more complex way of being able to manipulate data in your code. And then finally, the last kind of thing we went over is arrays and array lists. So these are just being able to put a data type in or a bunch of data types in a collection, and being able to group them together and manipulate them as a whole. So if you like, I would recommend you sort of go over the lessons that are mainly focused on these 4 different types of concepts, because these are the most helpful for creating your own programs. So next, for this final project, we basically want you to create your own Java program. But the thing with like creating a Java program is like you can technically create anything, but we want to sort of like, we want to give you the freedom to basically create anything you want. I think like something that might be difficult with this like kind of project itself is just like, because you can create anything you want, it's sort of hard to be like, where do I start? So we've decided to give you a list of ideas that you can of like programs you can make on the right side. And we've also ordered it from the least difficult to the most difficult. So something that would be very good for a beginner programmer, you can create like a currency converter or like a number guessing game. These are pretty like, these will use some more basic Java concepts, and then you can do anything up to like Sudoku. So Sudoku is a little bit more complicated, but technically you'll be able to do it. Some recommendations I would say for a beginner Java program is just avoid thinking about sort of what user, like the user interface. So we haven't talked much about like creating a Java program that is very user friendly. A lot of our demos just use like the console or like the command line. I would recommend you stick with that, mostly because sort of converting a program into an actual like piece of software that uses like a really nice like GUI or like graphic user interface requires like using like or learning a different Java library and then learning a few like more complex concepts when it comes to programming. So this list on the right is basically what we think is pretty beginner friendly for like for your final project. And last thing we can go over is just some coding tips and tricks. So the first one is I would really recommend you to design before you code. So when we went over classes, we talked a lot about, or we talked a bit about class diagrams. I would really recommend you sort of draw out, like, think about what classes will you need when you make your code and what methods will you need to implement or to like make your code work. So don't just jump straight into coding, because sometimes what happens is you'll actually code yourself into a corner where you haven't really thought about the design of something, but now like you've written so much code that's too late to really like change the design of something. But like at the same time, the way you've designed a class or like the way you've designed a solution has like makes it a lot more difficult for you to actually make your project work. A lot of like coding, when you get to like more complex code, is not actually about like the syntax or like making some super clever hack to make something work. It's actually about how do I design my code to be extensible and to be scalable. So make sure, instead of like just jumping into like this is what I have to implement, this is like what I have to do, and like just coding or just like jumping in and coding, first think about like, well, how do I do this on a conceptual level, and then in order to implement the solution, what classes do you need and what methods will you need? Also, second off, just don't be afraid to use online resources and don't be afraid to ask for help. Of course, with online resources, always make sure to use multiple sources. Not everybody is right on the internet, so make sure that like the solutions you find are first correct and second actually solve your issue. But that being said, like don't be afraid to just Google something or even to like ask teachers for help. The second part of this is just some tips with debugging. So a lot of times what happens when you like first write your code is nothing goes right. Nothing ever goes right like the first time you write a piece of code. So what you'll have to do a lot is just debugging. And that's basically just finding what's wrong with your code and making it work. So the first part of debugging is identify the error. So what exactly is causing the issue? This can be like the hardest part of debugging. The first thing I recommend is just read the error messages. Java isn't trying to trick you, and like Java isn't trying to trick you with compiler error messages, and they aren't being I would say they aren't being tricky on purpose. A lot of Java error messages, once you understand how to read an error message, it'll be very easy to identify where your code went wrong. So start practicing reading those compile error messages, because a lot of times, once like you get used to that, you'll sort of understand like how Java works. Also, this second off is print statements help a lot. So the first part of the like debugging or finding the error is like, what does the error message say? And once you know what the error message says, you want to try to identify, like, is that actually the line that went wrong? Or is there something before that line that like caused everything after it to go wrong? So you can sort of find that out by using print statements and sort of printing out the data to see like what's actually happening. Second up is use your resources. So think about what outside resources might be helpful. Again, like Google is your friend, and don't be afraid to ask me or even Anna about like for help with debugging, and we'll try to walk you through that. Finally, this is just some additional resources for like if you want to look a little deeper into Java. So this first one is just going to be AP free response questions. So this is just some extra practice that you can do on your own time. This next one is CodingBat Java questions. CodingBat is actually a really good resource for any language, honestly. And I think they're also pretty useful for when you want to practice like interview questions that use Java. And they also have some questions that are more geared towards AP practice. This is just also some more practice questions. And then finally, these are just some project ideas using Java. All right, so after that, yeah, so this is basically the end of the presentation for this lesson. Again, I'll be staying back until like the rest of class time, just in case you guys have some more questions about Java or stuff, like want some help with your project. But besides that, like you can just go out and like start working on your projects. Projects aren't, also just a heads up, like projects aren't due at the end of class. There technically isn't, I don't believe that there is like a hard deadline for them. But we're just trying to give you some time where you can code, but also have some time where like teachers are also available to give you one-on-one help. And then finally, you can also feel free to share your projects. You can post your projects on GitHub if you know how to use Git, or you can post it on Replit. And we'd also like it if you send, like if you're comfortable, you can also send us your projects using this submission form. And then finally, this is the feedback form for, I think for classes overall. Again, we really appreciate it if you just fill out the feedback form, because this will help us for future classes, not just for Java lessons. All right, so this is basically the end of the presentation.